My name is David Pickering. I'm a product marketing director, and Danny Hong, who is one of our product managers, is also joining me today to talk a little bit more about the product and directions of where we're going with this. And one of the things, I guess, from the point of view from Jeff's presentation this morning was very much around IT and security and merging those and converging those solutions or capabilities or teams, etc. And when we look at DevSecOps, I think that's a true indication of where security and development, certainly in the IT side, are often separated and fighting each other with what they're trying to do. And we're going to walk through some of the challenges that we have in that space and also then look at how we actually try and resolve that with the solutions that we've got. So that's the scenario behind what we're talking about today. It's about that convergence of IT and more development rather than necessarily just a generic IT side of things. And one of the things we've identified over a period of time is that from a pure DevOps side of things, 80% of DevOps stalls are caused by security of some sort. So when we're going through that process of doing DevOps, often the process or that continuous development flow tends to get stalled because of some sort of security issue identified. How many people are doing DevOps in the room? I'm assuming people, DevOps. Anyone doing DevSecOps? Probably not. Because that's an interesting scenario, because DevSecOps, in some ways, people say they fight each other, but they don't need to fight each other. And I will talk through what the challenges are, how we believe that they can go together. And this is, as much as anything, a concept of what we're talking about. It does work. We've got the solutions there, but we also want to get some feedback on where do you not think it might work? Is it not going to work in your organization? So I hope to make this a little bit of an interactive session so that you might sort of put your hand up and go, hey, have you thought about this or have you thought about that? And Danny's certainly keen to get any feedback that you might have around potential directions or shapes or anything that we might be going. So what are we going to talk about? So we're going to talk about the challenges faced by IT and security, because they're both similar but quite different. And then we're going to start to break down what are the silos that are there and how do we break those silos down? And that's, again, linking up with what Jeff talked about. How do we break down those silos so that we don't have the issues that we have within your environments, your configurations? And then how do we align and automate that from a DevSecOps? So we're talking about what's the next stage. So now we've broken down the silos, we need to automate and work and build that workflow out. And then we'll look at the roadmap. Where do we think we're headed with this? What's the direction we're going? What are we thinking about doing? So when we look at DevOps and DevSecOps, there's various things we're looking at. Most people, most organizations tend to be doing some sort of DevOps. And when we look at what organizations have talked about, 80% of organizations have some sort of DevOps in play. And that's true across the board from different data sources, whether it's HBR, Redgate, Puppet. They're all sort of saying a similar concept, which is a majority of organizations do some sort of DevOps, 70 to 80%. However, when we get to when we start to talk about the security side or the DevSecOps side, that's different results. Yeah. So when we get to this level, we start to talk about 72% of people are planning on unifying security with it. 70% are yet to actually implement it. And then if we do have those teams that are doing it, there's a large 33% of people actually don't know anything about security because they're developers, which is not an unnatural problem. So whilst we talk about DevSecOps, it's not as high within an organization. So DevOps, yes, most people are doing it. The security side of linking that and breaking down that silo, there's still some work to do. People know they need to do it, but they're wondering how they do it, I think is more the point. So what are the challenges faced by IT and security? Well, the first thing is developers don't care about security, largely speaking. They're about velocity. They're about getting that development out there. They're told we need to fix this, or we need to put this application code in here, or there's an upgrade. So we're going about that velocity of development. Security don't care about development, and they're just about security. How do I protect the data within the business? How do I protect the business? So let's look at that in a little bit more detail. So from a development side, as I said, developers don't know about security, or if they do, there's probably not enough knowledge about some of that security aspects. And all developers will say they've got too much information, too much data. So that's going to be applications that they have to be working on that need to roll out, upgrades, patches, everything that's to do with just purely development. And then imagine adding into that the security of vulnerabilities and findings that we have to fix. So suddenly they're going, I don't know what to do. There's too much. How do they prioritize the pressures of what security is saying you have to fix versus what your application teams are trying to do? And we'll look at what do we mean by that prioritization of security. And then we've got the education. If I get thrown a vulnerability, do I understand what that is? What do I have to fix? What does it mean? What's the impact to the organization? So there's a lot of information around that security side that we need to educate a bit more on the developers so that they can resolve what the issues are. And naturally, what's their process? Continuous development. So the stress of continuous development versus being pulled to fix other issues is part of the problem that we have within that DevOps side or that development side. Now, on the security side of things, what's their core requirement? Protect the business. It's about making sure the business and its data is protected. Now, just as bad or just as good for them, there's too much data for them. There's so many vulnerabilities out there, whether it's application vulnerabilities, whether it's host vulnerabilities, whether it's configurations. They've got a lot of information that they need to try and prioritize as well. So similar concepts, too much information. How do we prioritize that information? And then potentially in organization, there's that lack of collaboration and communication between developers and security as to what do we work on? How do we work on it? What do we do? It's more a reactive process, not a proactive process. And we all know security issues change every day, very quickly and very fast. And if we look at the DevOps cycle in its purest state without security being involved early in the process, what typically happens is we'll get to that testing release phase, and that's where we'll start to identify those security issues and vulnerabilities, which then delays that rollout. So that then rolls back to 80% of my delays in development are caused at some point by security, largely speaking. It's not that the application doesn't work, it's because we've identified something that shouldn't be open to it. So how do we reduce that or remove that bottleneck? So now we're going to start talking about what are the silos. So these are the silos that we have within the environment when we're talking at DevOps side and start to introduce that DevSecOps. So application developers love Jira or Azure DevOps. That's their life. They'll get their application requirements. They'll get their issues that they need to resolve. That's what they work from. And that's typically a Jira or Azure DevOps. Then you have your source code side of things and source code. I'm not naming everything that does source code here. I've just named common ones. Jenkins, GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, whatever you want it from a tool perspective. Completely unique to application development. From an operational side, they use IT service management. IT service management is going to look at it from an incident, problem, change, asset. Now, there is linkage between those two because often application issues are identified through incident management. Something's happening that needs to be resolved through development. So it raises an incident, integration into Jira or Azure DevOps, and there's a synchronization between the two so that the incident management team knows when it's been fixed from a point of view of the application side. So that's a fairly mature integration. Most organizations will typically have some means of integrating incidents with their application development. And then we introduce security. And on the security side, this is a very small number of the applications that are out there that are doing some sort of security testing, vulnerability measurement, looking at different information. Application scanners and network scanners are pulling different information, looking at different things. From the application side, they look at different types of capabilities. Most organizations who have this will have multiple scanners out there that need some sort of reconciliation to identify what is the most important thing to me. So we've got all this information on the right-hand side from security and application and operations from the DevOps side are doing what they do. And if we look at it from the security side, and this is statistics we have, the number of vulnerabilities can be hundreds of thousands, but we don't want to send that to teams to go and resolve because maybe that's not important within my environment. Maybe that's not the most important thing. Maybe that's not the trending. So what we do is we want to prioritize that to say at the bottom level, instead of 300,000, maybe we have 400 that we need to fix. And then how do we prioritize that? Who do we send that to? So from a security side, that's reducing the workload to who else needs to work on it. But that 400 might not be all developers. It might be operations, it might be configuration change, it might be just a change management process. So how do we go about breaking down the silos, and what do we look at when we're looking at it for breaking down the silos? Now, Jeff said this when we're talking about the platform for IT and security. It's about having a central place to manage threats and vulnerabilities using best practices. And that's what we're trying to build out with what we're doing here with our DevSecOps solution. It's about a centralized management of those threats and vulnerabilities. And what we're talking about here is making security shift left. So instead of being that right-hand side, which is like the back-end test release type process, how do we move that to the left where it's more aligned with our application development and operations? Which means when we do detect something, we can fix it and verify it within the early process of the stage, not at the end where we're doing testing. So that then becomes part of that process for application developers to be able to do that work. And if we look at it from a Gartner view of the world, it gets way confusing. If anyone's seen this, it's a much more detailed picture than what we normally talk about. But this is where you start to get into the different tools. Yeah. At this verification stage, that's where a lot of those different tool sets we're talking about. There'll be different things looking at applications, infrastructure, various other parts of your system. So that's that verification part. But then we also need to look at things like when we're in the early stages, what are our threat models? What's currently the most common threats throughout there in the world? We need to develop for those threats. We also need to do penetration testing and other things at the back end. So there's a whole lot of different places we need to do bits of work. But what we want to do is make that part of the cycle, not just part of the back end. So what does that look like? And the way we think about this from our point of view is, first thing is get all those multiple data sources and normalize and correlate that data and reconcile it. So it doesn't matter whether it's application data, host data, whatever the data source is, and it could even be coming from our monitoring solutions. But get all those vulnerabilities and findings and bring that into one place so we understand what it is that's impacting us, whether it's the assets, the host, the applications, etc. So that's the first stage. The second stage of that is then to prioritize those. So based on vulnerability knowledge-based information, we can then start to say, well, this is trending as a popular thing for hackers to try and get through. So there's a particular vulnerability that we know. This is something that's just occurred, so we're still working it out. But this is something that's important to our organization because we've got a lot of that. So what we're doing is looking at what's the business risk, what's the real world risk, and what's currently trending to give us a prioritization list. So narrow it down from the 300,000 to a couple of hundred or less, hopefully. Then we want to integrate that. So what we're doing now is we know what we need to fix, who needs to fix it. So that's the next question. So the next question is, who needs to fix this issue? Is it application development? Is it maybe the security team? Is it just a patch? Or maybe it's just a change? Could be a simple configuration that we forgot to do and we just need to change it. So what we do is we send that to our ITSM system as a central place of managing that, because the ITSM system then can go in any direction. They can send it to our change management platform. It can send it as a security incident. They can send it to the database team, or it can send it to application development. Who needs to manage that fix? And what we do is send that there And it can also be then linked and back to impacted services, because security looks at it from an asset or an application. But if that asset, is that asset linked to internet banking, or is it just an internal system? Still needs to be fixed, but it might change the importance of that fix. Or it's just a development system that hasn't actually rolled into production. Again, still needs to be fixed, but if it's not in production, does it change the prioritization? So understanding the impact of services and where there are, rather than just purely an asset, also changes the way you prioritize. And then assign that to the appropriate team to remediate. As I said, could be application development, could be operations, could be anyone. So when we assign that out, which direction does it go? Does it go to one team or the other team? So then it gets assigned to the appropriate team. If it's an application team, we send that out to Azure or DevOps or Jira. The application people like to use that. I've not found many developers who like to use ITSM tools, surprisingly. I found lots of operational people who like ITSM tools, not a developer. So once we've done that, maybe we need to get the source code fixed. So they'll prioritize that. They'll build out the source code, test it, get it ready for a deployment. But before we deploy it, maybe we need to get approval. So we raise a change, and that change might need to go to the operational team to get approved. Automate that process so I can do that. Approve the change, and then it gets pushed out to production. So we're trying to automate some of that process. And then have the dashboards and analytics sitting there. So have visibility. So the visibility is across the top to say, I've got all these findings. I know which teams they got to, what's still waiting to be repaired or fixed. So I've got some means of keeping track of what vulnerabilities have been resolved, what hasn't been resolved, who's working on it, how long are they going to work on it, etc. And then the security team continue what they do, which is monitor to make sure we fix the security issues. So that's the shift left process that we're talking about. So it's a step-by-step process. And what we're going to do is sort of walk through that and sort of get through how does that actually look within the platform. The key to also is automation and integration. So having that automated across the process, and also the integration. So integration being key, particularly when we get to DevOps, Azure DevOps, GitHub, or any other tools that we're using from an application development, and having visibility. Because otherwise we're working in silos. We don't have the visibility across those silos. So I'm going to hand over to Danny to sort of walk through the next stage of that. So we talked about the high-level process. Now we're actually going to look at a bit more of that process in its own right.
We have this common goal, right? Of we want to deliver our products and services faster and more efficiently. We want to deliver higher quality to our customers, and we also want to deliver more securely, right? Especially today, it's becoming more and more and increasingly important. So especially with the threat landscape evolving each day and IT landscape the way it is today, we have so many more assets in so many different places, and just a lot more vulnerabilities that are being discovered. So today, really what Ivanti does is, we're on that common goal as well. We want to be able to secure by design. It's kind of a buzzword, but we want to ensure that security is top of mind from the planning phases, the beginning of development, and not waiting till the end. So really where that starts for us today is with risk-based vulnerability management, or RBVM. Some of you may know it as RiskSense, but essentially what we do today is, we leverage RiskSense RBVM's just really cool capabilities in normalizing our data. So we're able to, take in multiple scanner sources and really establish a common language so we can make sense of that data. And RBVM also does something really cool where it contextualizes the data. It adds, basically what it does is it gives you what they call a vulnerability risk rating. And so it prioritizes your vulnerabilities, the risks against your organization, does it by looking at the vulnerability score, the severity of that vulnerability, asset criticality for the asset that the vulnerability is discovered on. And so we get some really great data out of our RBVM, and some of those things, we have our application findings. We may have DAS and SAST application scanners and our SCA tools connected to RBVM. And, we also have host findings that RBVM can kind of segment. And, this data comes from our network scanners, right? Our call list, Tenable, or Nessus, whatever you like to call it. And Rapid7 is a common one as well. So really, I think we get all of this information from RBVM. And what we do with that to bring it into ITSM is we have a pre-built connector. And essentially, this connector will allow us to import different vulnerability findings from RBVM. And as we saw with David's presentation, we definitely don't want to bring in all vulnerabilities. There's thousands or even maybe more depending on your organization's environment. And so what we do is we allow a filter, basically setting a parameter, a filter criteria, where you're able to set up different parameters as far as, maybe you only care about vulnerabilities with high asset criticality or above a certain VRR score. And those are the ones that you really want to send to your development and operations teams and really prioritize some of that remediation work. So in this example today, this is from RBVM, from ITSM, excuse me. And we take the findings, we enable the operations analysts that are working in ITSM to basically get a detailed list view of those different findings and the assets they were discovered on. And they're able to use that data and manage that, create a remediation ticket. They're able to set up automation workflows. In this instance, we may have found a Adobe Flash finding on a remote Windows host. And so we've identified that we need to go and, there's an outdated version of Adobe Flash Player. So we have to go and run a patch. And so we can send that out to ITSM. We can automate the creation of an incident ticket and assign that out, route that to whichever team is responsible, whichever team is appropriate to handle that incident. In another scenario, we're able to also, if there's like an anonymous FTP vulnerability that's discovered, we can create a change request and route that also to the appropriate team for them to go and make that configuration change. So this is, obviously with ITSM's workflow engine, automation is very possible with all different aspects of the connection between RBVM and ITSM, and we do have plans to enhance that in the future as well. But now let's look into how some of this plays into the application side of things. And so as we get our application findings from RBVM, for example, we've identified a blind SQL injection. We can create a ticket within ITSM, but then also create a correlated ticket in Azure DevOps or Jira, because as David said to you, developers, they don't want to work in ITSM. They want to work in their tried and true tools that they already use. And so we're not trying to replace any ticketing tool, right? Azure DevOps or Jira. We're really allowing the application developers to use the tools that they're already comfortable with, providing, and ultimately providing an integration to ITSM. So there's seamless communication between application development teams, operations teams working in ITSM, and also from the security standpoint, because we have all of this data from the RBVM tool, we're able to facilitate and provide the data to all different teams. So in this case, we've created a ticket in Azure DevOps. The details of the finding, the ticket, will also be populated in the ticket. And as we work through remediation, as our application teams work through remediation in Azure DevOps, they'll change the status or add an update, a comment, or maybe an attachment. Those updates will sync into ITSM and back and forth. So you're always working with an accurate, almost real-time, near to real-time source of data. I say near to real-time because today we pull in the findings on a schedule. So you're able to leverage schedule entry, whether it's daily or maybe every Tuesday, you want to bring in those findings, you can set that up and configure that how you want. This really cool. Now moving on a little bit to kind of what happens when the developer, they work through their remediation, they have made a code change to fix basically a code fix, right? they will submit a pull request, get that approved, and seek to commit the code into whether it's production or your staging environment. And so, really, here we're able to integrate GitHub with ITSM. So we really get that data. We can track that within ITSM and see, what status of a pull request or an approval, or any kind of activity around the code deployment. We can track that in ITSM and have that information visible to the teams working there. And then, even beyond this as well, we can set up various different approval workflows. If we need to, maybe after or prior to a code commit, we send a change approval to ITSM. We can go to perhaps a change advisory board or a certain team. And so this ensures that they are in the loop. They're in the loop from any kind of code that's being committed to our applications or source code. And, just being able to really communicate in one tool. That's kind of Ivanti's goal, is allowing these different integrations, these different capabilities, streamlining workflows, and providing a better user experience for all different teams that are working within our organization. So, and here's some of that there. So again, really, this all comes down really to the visibility that we get out of ITSM. We're able to see the prioritized vulnerabilities that we're remediating, real-time data around the status of tickets, remediation tickets, and we're able to use this data for just really cool actionable insights, decision making, and other things to improve our processes. Just really cool. With these, we can set up various different reports to different teams or different roles, and kind of configure those to each team. So, just to kind of really summarize today, what Ivanti really is looking at enhancing is we're starting with the vulnerability response use case, and it's not, this isn't anything groundbreaking, but I think Ivanti's focus, and many of you may have heard the CEO's commitment to security the last few days. We're really looking at, how do we work with our customers, our partners, subject matter experts, to really understand, some of the challenges that organizations face. What are the most impactful challenges that we can solve? And how do we integrate different tools to really provide frictionless, the goal is frictionless interactions between development, security, and operations. So I want to get into a little bit about what we're doing as far as, what our vision for DevSecOps is within Ivanti. And, to be honest, we're still defining a lot of what that looks like. We're still learning from our challenges, the obstacles that we faced, and a lot from our customers. I'm working with many of our customers today to really understand their processes and where they want to end up as well. So this is kind of an high-level idea of what Ivanti is looking to do over the next few years here. And again, a lot of this will be impacted by what our customers, what you tell us, what the subject matter experts, partners, what kind of the evolving market landscape, what happens there. But today we're working on, if you're in the now section, today we're working on enhancing our scanner to CMDV integration. So today what we do is we do a match against scanned hosts and vulnerabilities, scanned hosts and applications within RBVM. And we'll seek to do a match against our ITSM CMDV. There's room for enhancement there, and we definitely want to improve the confidence of the matching, opening up different criteria for flexibility, and also reconciliation of unmanaged devices or unmatched devices. That's something that's very important as well. And then something else we've been hearing from customers as well is, how do we validate this stuff? We don't want to just inject, and say, import these assets, link them to my CMDB, and we find out it's just completely wrong. So some sort of validation process, some sort of process to be able to revert back and say, oops, we made a mistake. Let's rewrite some of those changes. We're also looking at more pre-built connections to dev tools. that initiative, will align a lot with what's going on with iPaaS, and being able to really build out these really quick and easy seamless integrations between third-party tools and ITSM. I think that will bring a lot of value to our customers as well. And then just lastly, for in the now section, we're working on a tighter integration with RBVM, being able to really push back the data, keep the data updated in both systems, and facilitate different kinds of workflows from RBVM. What we have next, other things that we're thinking about, just really cool. With our Neurons platform, we have all of these intricate tools that we use to patch our devices, manage our mobile devices, discover our assets. And so really looking into how ITSM and RBVM integrates into those different components. The packing a patch scenario is very intriguing to me, being able to, bridge that gap between what patch teams are doing, security is doing, what operations teams want to know about what they're doing. So yeah, that's kind of some of what we're looking at there. And then one thing for me that I find really fascinating and is really evolving today is GRC, right? Compliance. There's various different regulations that are being constructed, being updated. NIST 2.0 just came out this year. There's cybersecurity framework. There's also an AI framework. I'm not sure if it's been released yet, but I know in the works. ISO 27001, that's a huge one, a standard that we need to adhere, a lot of organizations adhere to. And even overseas, there's financial regulations that are starting to pop up. DORA is one that comes to mind. And then just the various different data protection rules and regulations that we deal with today. And that's going to continue to evolve. And so really having a focused risk management strategy to be able to better understand, our different risks that we face, not just with vulnerabilities, but with compliance risks, data, privacy risks, those kinds of things. And so I think there's a lot to come in the GRC aspect of things. I think there's a lot of correlation between compliance and security. And I believe we'll definitely see a lot more of these different compliance in the mix. I think that's kind of like the next step as well. So, and then just a quick touch on the future, but obviously, everyone's talking about Gen AI. But, how do we leverage this technology to really support our remediation processes, our deployment schedules, just really making things a lot more efficient and effective for our talent, our IT talent and our teams to really kind of facilitate that whole process. So
from the point of view of what we just looked at, it's really about looking at, with Ivanti, you're on security operations management, which is what sits on the top of the ITSM solution with RBVM, is firstly that integration with RBVM, whether it's application findings, host findings, bringing that data in. But also, as Danny said, with the APIs, whether it's the REST APIs that we have within the ITSM toolset or iPaaS, we can bring in other external security solutions into that security operation. So it could be a monitoring solution that doesn't go through RBVM. It could be just a standard monitoring solution. So centralizing those events and doing security event management to centralize that vulnerabilities and findings, whether it's goes to operations, development teams, security teams, whoever we want that to go through, manage it as security incidents if we need to do that. And if you're aware of what the NIST standards have, they have certain criteria around if it's a security incident, how do you manage that? And looking at how do we manage the security incident to meet what NIST provides. IT service management for change, DevOps integration. But core to that is that visibility. What's the visibility across all of those? We're not working in silos. We're now seeing it as one centralized view of that. And that's what our goal is here. And that's the goal of the company with that single platform. And really it comes down to increasing that security staff efficiency. We don't want to have people working on vulnerabilities that are 300,000. You're working on what's the most important thing for that security team to work on. Enable them to work on the right activities with the right focus. Automate remediation work. And that's the key part of that. If we automate the remediation work, get it to the right team quickly and have them working on it, then it will get resolved quicker. And even better, if we start even longer term, when we start to bring in, say, Gen I, for example, Gen AI, we should then be able to say even automate further with what that can do, because generative AI will start to get smart and go, I've seen this, I know which team it needs to go to. We don't have to have manual assignment, etc. And then continuously improve that security operations. What is it it's impacted? Do we always see the same impact against, say, a business service or a particular type of asset or a particular vulnerability? Is that always reoccurring? Because if you've got visibility and you've got measurement and you've got data, maybe there's a gap somewhere else that you haven't identified yet. So having that continuous improvement is part of that as well. So the whole concept is, and that's part of DevOps and part of DevSecOps, it's a continuous operation, continuous improvement. We're not getting in the way of that. What we want to do is automate that and centralize that so it's visibility over the top.